Hi guys, a quick throw together here just to get started with the process of a video that would actually guide you through installation. There are so many different potential levels of expertise and comfort out there in the potential user community. I really don't think it's going to be possible to put together a single video that isn't hours long that targets all levels of comfort and expertise. So what I'm going to start with is piecemeal. This one will show you where the repositories are and take you for a quick walk. Then I'll do other ones that talk about downloading and installing components. So you want to start at my GitHub repository page. Okay, it's Thinker's Bluff. So github.com/Thinker's Bluff will bring you here. At the top of the page, I have pinned the two repositories you're going to need to use to get all of DGUS-Reloaded down to your system. And there are different instructions for installing each half. There's a lot of detailed need to know kind of information. If you're already running Klipper, you will recognize a lot of what you see in the Klipper component repository anyway. So let me help you folks just to figure out where you're going and what you're going to do that's different to your machine, and then how to get the display up and running. And for those of you who are not using Klipper at all right now, never seen it, don't know what Linux is, you're way back at the on the learning curve, I'll try to give more targeted help in subsequent videos. The two repositories are pointed at one another so that I keep the two compatible components pointing at each other at all times. Excuse me. So no matter which release you're working with, you will always find you can simply click through to the component back and forth between the repositories as you explore, get your brain around it, and decide how to download it. So the releases are down the right-hand side here. There have been, for instance, 12 releases so far of the Klipper component, and the very latest one right now, the one that you see in the first video, is version 1.2.8. Click through on that, and the release notes are pretty much the same every time unless and until I change something relevant down here. So I'll read it at your leisure, but right now the thing to note that always changes is the hyperlink to the other half. So this baseline, by the way, we're calling it beta testing because only a couple of us have ever tried this thing, and Lord knows what workflows, what other system add-ins that you happen to have may turn out to conflict with what I've built here. A lot of what I have here was inherited as is from DesU. I don't even understand it myself, so I can't anticipate conflicts sometimes. So I need the community to give me feedback through issues and discussions if you start to find, hey, this would have been lovely, accept. But for as long as it's working, that's great. I'm still calling it beta because I'm going to feel bad when it eats something of yours. So if you click on the beta version link here that says beta of the DWIN set, it takes you to the latest release, always tagged, right? Latest release of the other half, the display component. And that version of the UI, which I'm always running the latest on my machine, but plus edits. So I run the latest right up until I come up with another idea. So not for very long. So this is the version that is being offered by me to you as the most stable version I could build. And it's been tested by me to work correctly with the other component that you just came from. So if you click back on 1.2.8, if you started here, it brings you to this release. So you see the two releases are connected and the two repositories are connected. I link the repositories in their descriptions in their about section up here. Right? So this is the Klipper repository. Clicking on that link takes you to the DWIN set repository. Clicking on that link brings you to the Klipper repository. They're linked together. If you want to download this component, I've kind of set you up for confusion. There's a whole lot of README here. And it has evolved over time as my understanding and my confidence of the product matured. But I did not go back and super simplify this thing. If you're already running Klipper, do not download this modified version of Klipper. You'll see in code, I mean, the whole thing is here. Okay, you got Clippy, you've got C Helper, extras, kinematics. You've got the whole Klipper application here, snapshotted at the last time I updated it, which is not the latest anymore. I set it up this way back when I thought that the Klipper bin might not actually work on all 4 motherboards, that you might have to make flash your own. And the modified Klipper that's here comes with the code that lets you do that. Now we know that you do not need to make flash, so you do not need to download this entire modified Klipper set. You only need to use the related changes folder. You go into which motherboard do you have. If you're running the BTT board, for instance, you would go here. You would go to flash this to the motherboard, take this bin file, and flash it to your motherboard, your BTT SKR CR6 motherboard. Then you would go back to overwrite these Klipper host files. Ignore the KIAUH because you're not going to install this Klipper to your host, which is what that was for. Go into the use these configuration files and simply download what you find here. Because you're running Klipper, that's my premise, you know what these things are already, and that would be true if you're also running Mainsail with Klipper. I should clarify. If you're running Fluid, I'm sorry, I do not. I don't have the energy or the bandwidth to do that to myself and then try to figure out if there were any conflicts and then try to offer you another solution. I'm going to limit myself to Mainsail only. And if that doesn't please you, I am sorry for you, but I'm only going to maintain this for Mainsail. So these are the Mainsail files, and in here I have left annotations, mostly in the printer config file. If we go in there for a second, I can give you the example. You'll see a whole lot of comments. You'll notice I don't always remember to update that date in the file. But important, tailor this file and calibrate your printer before trying to print any models. Right? I've done my best to annotate this file, which is specific to my printer, So you want to be very careful to read all the comments and make whatever edits you wish. And don't, if you don't, but if you leave differences between my file and yours, it is possible that the interface will not function correctly. There are times when pushing a button on the display invokes a macro in one of these files. And if the macro isn't there, pushing the button is just not going to do anything. Right? It's just not going to work. So I took away the do not modify below this line so that if folks took this and installed it on their system, they wouldn't accidentally be importing my customized settings at the same time. So I did put back all the things that I've subsequently replaced, like the Z offset and so on that I had already calibrated. I have put back a default value. But you will need to go through this and do a deep comparison between the two, and probably only for printer config, CR6 config, and DGUS-Reloaded if you've already used a previous version. But I can't promise that either. So what I recommend is you use an application called WINMERGE .exe to make the comparison. So let's just quickly WINMERGE download WinMerge. This is the application I'm talking about. Don't fall for the ads here. You're not installing works where you write. You're looking for download now of WinMerge. Bring it down for your host and use it to compare the CR6 file on your system with the CR6 file on mine. The printer config on yours with the printer config in this related changes folder that I'm offering you. And line by line, make your decisions, which things you want to copy in and which things you'd prefer your version of it. And then go at it. So, back to, let's just do the shortcut code. So in my README file, I've told you that this is a fork of the 3D master fork because Desu had done that, and that's where I got mine, right? So I took his fork, I did a little bit more to it as my fork. You've seen the companion repo for the DWIN sets, and my philosophy is you keep the two separate because you can use this one all by itself. You don't have to use the other also, but you can't use the other by itself. It has to be used with this. So there's your little history in case you wanted to follow up. Maybe you want to take this in a whole different direction. I wanted to give you enough information. Some of these printers do not need the display. So if you're running it with, say, an LCD terminal on a BTT board, this doesn't do anything for you anyway, and you don't need it because Klipper has an LCD interface baked in. As does the latest Marlin, by the way. So if you wanted to work with the latest Marlin, you could be using their LCD display. But those of us with TFTs need a matching application to talk to the motherboard. You can't just use his version because his version wasn't written for the CR6. It doesn't know what a CR6 is. It's very generalized, and you're expected to make your own Klipper bin file and so on. So, plus he said he was going to walk away from that design and take a totally different approach. So going that way was a dead end. So I brought you my own fork, and I undertook to maintain it a little bit. People ask me, was it using the latest Klipper? Well, kinda. I did go back to 11.0 as it was in November of last year, 2022, and I did make the update. And then I realized I didn't need to maintain this because you don't have to flash your own Klipper bin, and there's really only disadvantages to using an older version of Klipper when you're trying to let Moonraker update things, and Moonraker gets all bitchy about dirty repositories and doesn't like to update from a different repo. They took away that functionality, and therefore they're not going to bring it back. So all in all, my recommendation is just install, right? See, should I install this thing? You could, but I don't. Take the latest Klipper and install that first. So if you haven't already installed Klipper, you're going to be installing Klipper per their data set, per their instructions. Everything's going to work brilliantly. Any support you need is going to be available from them until you get it all up and running, and then come here and decide, hey, I want to do this display thing as well, and just put in the related changes. Okay, so there's a 5-step folder. Here you go, next section. I'm getting ahead of myself. So there are 2 basic mods I've made here. The T5UID1 folder and its subfolder and all the files that are in it, that is the DGUS-Reloaded application. That's the thing that's communicating between the host and the display. It goes into the Clippy Extras folder. You can simply copy it in there, say with a file transfer protocol, and or learn how to download it into that folder. Some of the make menu files had to be modified to build your own Klipper bin, but I've done that for you already, so you don't need to do that. Just take my Klipper bin and put it on your motherboard. You will retain the ability to update the Klipper anytime you like using Moonraker. So you've installed it per Klipper 3D's instructions. Moonraker's already maintaining the repo. You copy the T5UID1 folder into Clippy Extras. I see Moonraker put a little exclamation mark up now, very recently, that says, hey, that's dirty. But it doesn't seem to bother it at all. It doesn't prevent it from updating the configurations. It doesn't, the installations of Klipper and Moonraker and so on, it'll still do it. It's throwing me a message that sounds very scary. It says, hey, if you do this, you might break something. But I think that's them being unsure what my dirty thing is. I can tell you I've done it without penalty. There's been no consequences to doing it. It just updates the repositories and we're all fine. So sorry that they're making this a scary thing, but it is fine, as far as you trust me. The guidelines for how to do this, how to install with the latest Klipper and then put this on board, are written in this section here. I've already done my best to make it clear, so I won't take you through it now. If it doesn't make sense as you read it, it won't make sense if I read it to you. I will attempt to demonstrate how to do this in a subsequent video. But there are the written instructions for those who wish to try. If you decide, against my advice, to go ahead and put this modified Klipper in place, you will have difficulty with Klipper Online Help because they keep updating it and it no longer describes the firmware that you've chosen to install. So make sure you're working with the version of documentation that is also snapshotted on this repository. Hopefully you won't go there because I don't plan to keep coming back and updating it. It's too much work and trouble for me and it's not worth it. I am more likely to eventually take all that away from this repository and just leave you the T5 UID stuff. Somewhere on that great long learning to-do list of mine is how to master GitHub so that you can distribute an application like this simply with easy to install instructions. It's just I don't know how to do that yet, so I can't do it for you either. As with all these things, help is always appreciated. Open a discussion, tell me what it is I don't understand yet and how to do it. I'll happily get it done. Even better, submit me a pull request where you've already done it, and I'll happily accept it. So that takes me to how to contribute. I looked carefully at the idea. There are 2 repositories here, and in truth, any bugs you find could be distributed between the 2 applications the way I've networked them together, could be embedded in one or the other, and you wouldn't know, and I don't want you to have to figure that out. So I've only maintained, I've implemented issues and discussions only on the DWIN-set component because that's the front end, that's the user interface, that's your experience with this pair of things. And I will sort out whether fixing whatever it is bothering you is best done in one component or the other, rather than you trying to guess for me which one is probably broken. Okay. And just for fun, one of our members in the Discord has already created a totally different way of interfacing the display with Klipper. He took the approach of bypassing the motherboard totally. He assumed a small board computer like a Raspberry Pi as your Klipper host. He's driving the display directly from that host and interfacing with the printer from that host. So his interface is different than this one. I did port it to the stock display. You do have the option of going his way instead. It takes a little piece of hardware, which I've forgotten the proper name for, but it's a USB to transistor logic translator. So a little USB stick-sized thing. You plug your printer in on one side, your printer display on the other side, and when you've got it set up correctly, your Pi is able to manipulate your display. That is all implemented in this project here by BuzzT. So I haven't monitored that for a while. Maybe it's evolved since I last changed it. That's his link, and that's the link to my copy of it, my porting of it. More information than I think you were expecting to find, but there you go. And if we quickly look at t'other side, where the DWIN-set component is a little bit easier for you to work with, I think, in terms of download and flash. If you simply go to the latest release, down to the assets, and take that zip file, whatever zip file you find there, it will contain the DWIN-set folder that you want to copy to your SD card DWIN-set, root because it's already named D1 set. So you can just copy that in. But, as with all things, there's always a but. Let's see if I go in here and I open it. There are 3 things in there. One of them is the D1 set folder. As I promised you, if you copied that folder to the root of a blank micro SD card, shove it in your display, cycle power, it will flash the DGUS-Reloaded DWIN set. But if it's the first time you have flashed this application, you see these one-time DWIN set files. I have changed the font. It's not the same font that you've got on the CF 6.1 interface. I finally conquered that issue where the descenders were being truncated by DGUS. So this font is the one you need to make the display data fit where I've put it, right? It doesn't stick out of the fields and so on. And there's a configuration file because where I load the displays is different than where the CF 6.1 loads them. So you need to copy these 2 files into the DWIN set folder, or if you prefer, put them in a blank folder on the card, call the folder DWIN set and put them in that. Doesn't matter if you flash these files one at a time or all of a bunch, as long as you've flashed them all to the machine. And since the configuration file is the one that's telling DGUS where to put things, it's probably best to put that one in first so that it puts everything else where it should. So put it in with everything else. The config file you'll see in the blue screen is one of the first things it loads right after it decides whether the operating system is being flashed or not. And then it'll load the screens and so on into the correct places. So while I have DWIN set open again, some of your eyes might have caught that there's so many bump files in here and wondered why. It is not necessary to have the bitmap files in this folder when you are flashing to your display, nor does it do any harm if they are there. The screen will totally ignore these files. The reason these files are in here is because when I'm working with DWIN set in the tool, these are widgets that I'm trying to place exactly where I want them on a graphic. The graphic behind here would not be visible if the file is not in the DWIN set folder when I open the project. So those are there for my benefit. Saves me an extra step or 2 in the workflow every time I update this application. But it doesn't matter to you whether they're there or not, truly, as long as your card's big enough to hold everything. There will be more videos in the series as I work my way slowly through the details that I think you need depending on your background, your level of expertise, and what systems you're already running on your display. I'll just caution that if you do decide to flash the DWIN set component to your system and then you change your mind, you decide you'd like to flash back, say, to the community firmware or to Creality stock, you will need to flash their font and their T5L config file to make their firmware work on your display. Those 2 files are critical to whichever version you're installing when they are different from each other. Okay. So that's it from me. I will be back again with another video when I'm able to get that organized and get it done. Talk to you soon, guys. Bye-bye.